Hi, everybody. It's Marcy from wavesofcommunication.com, and I'm back for another Q&A episode where I've got a really cool topic to talk about first. Today, we're going to be talking about how your triggers are actually keys. Your triggers, whatever triggers you, is the key to helping you make real change and real progress. So nobody likes to get their buttons pushed, but everybody is triggered by different things. So what I'm going to try to help you out is, to sort of help you understand how that process works for people and how you can actually use these moments when you are triggered to actually make better progress. By the way, that's a great way to help me out is hit the like button, like this video, share it with your friends, and, subscribe to my channel because this is how you're going to be notified every time I go live. You can hit that little notification bell. So thank you to everybody who's joining me live and all of those of you on the replay. So let's talk about triggers, okay? So there, many people, like I said, think that getting triggered is a bad thing, but, it actually can be really transformational when we learn how to use these moments. So, with all the things going on in the world right now, just pretty much as you scroll through Facebook, you're going to be triggered. There's going to be things, there's triggering conversation going on 24/7 around us, and that's kind of from the outside world, but I'm also talking about the kind of triggers that happen to you inside of your own home with your own family and how to use those triggers to actually help make progress on your language facilitation journey, and hopefully these same strategies you'll be able to use in other avenues of your life as well. So let's talk about triggers. And when we talk about triggers, there are different kinds of triggers. A physical trigger can be something like, guns, matches, chemical reactions. These things cause a change, right? A trigger causes a change in a state. So a physical trigger is going to cause a change in a physical state. You fire a gun and the bullet moves from its comfort zone inside of the gun to being, violently projected out of its comfort zone. That's a trigger. When you pull the trigger on the gun, something changes in that bullet's state, right? Same thing with matches. You strike the match and you cause that is the trigger. When you light the match, that's the trigger, okay? These cause a reaction. It's easy in the physical world to understand how that works because we see the reaction with a physical trigger, right? Now, the other kind of trigger that happens are emotional triggers, right? Whatever emotionally triggers us, it can be anything we see, feel, hear, any of our senses can cause a emotional trigger. And when that happens, just like the physical trigger, a reaction occurs. Whenever there's a trigger, there is a reaction. And when you understand what the physical trigger is and the physical reaction is going to be, you can use those things because that physical reaction is predictable in a physical trigger. Like a chemical reaction. You use the same chemicals, you're going to get the same chemical reaction. And the same works for emotional triggers. So the same things, and they come from habits. Emotional triggers come from habits. So if you are reading something or another on Facebook, you see Black Lives Matter and it triggers you, and somebody responds, All Lives Matter, and it triggers you. Those things, those emotional triggers happen from the programming that's in your mind, okay? Because the physical reaction is always the same every time, but the emotional reaction is different for every person. It might be the same to that one person, but different between other people. So, whatever triggers you, even a physical thing that might be very triggering to one person, might not be triggering to another person. And all of these things are something to consider when we're talking about triggers. And you think about what triggers you to act. What have you seen scrolling across your Facebook that has triggered you one way or another? What have you seen, heard, tasted, smelled in your world that has caused you to react because that smell or sensory perception changed your world in some way? The state of how you were comfortable, you were uncomfortable, now you got comfortable, because there are both positive and negative kinds of triggers. People think about them as positive or negative because the positive triggers will help you get into a sense of regulation and control. The negative triggers will force you to be out of control, okay? So it's really important to understand how this trigger is affecting you, because one person can look at a statement, Black Lives Matter, and be positively triggered by that statement, and another person can look at the same statement, Black Lives Matter, and be negatively triggered by the same output. And what's important if you want to use your trigger is to understand it, right? Is it a positive trigger or a negative trigger? And how you know if it, is positive or negative based on your reaction. So there's some examples of that. If you come home and your family has cleaned the whole house, you've been out at the store picking up supplies and you come home and the whole house is spotless and clean. That's a physical thing that somebody did, and your reaction is going to be very positive because you like the outcome. The new change that was triggered is nicer, and it causes you to be in a state of more comfort, in your comfort zone. You like it better when your house is clean, and when it's unclean or unkept, you're in a state of unease about that, okay? So that was a positive trigger, coming home and being surprised. In your mind, you might have been thinking, oh no, now I've got to go do cleaning up the house while I'm hauling in groceries, and you come home, surprise, trigger, positive result. Okay, now the negative kind of emotional trigger could happen. Let's say you're at a restaurant with your child who's late talking, and they're using some communication behavior like repetitive words, or they're screaming, or they're using some physical communication behavior like all late talkers do. They don't care if they're in public or private. But then people start talking about you or your kids or whatever. They just see the same situation. You're feeling frustrated, they're whatever. It's a trigger. Your child doing what they always do at home maybe didn't even trigger you, but out in public, that behavior didn't trigger you, but those other people's, their reaction to, they were triggered by your child's behavior, and maybe you weren't, right? But their trigger caused them to say some nasty comment or give you a look or whatever. Or maybe they didn't even, but you perceived that they did, and you got triggered by your child's behavior in public because you feel some sense of embarrassment, right? These are all triggers that will cause you to be in a different state. You might have been having a nice time at the restaurant, and then you heard somebody talk, or your child did this thing, or the waiter dropped who knows what triggered your child, and then their behavior triggered other people, and trigger. When it's a negative thing and you say, oh no, this thing's happening now, and you are triggered in a negative way, your reaction is always going to be fight or flight, because nobody likes a negative surprise, and you're always going to react when it's negative. Okay. However, when it's positive and you're in that comfort zone again, you can look at that trigger, and like you come home and the house is all clean, and then even expand into expressing gratitude and talking about how happy you are about that. Just like you would react to the change, if it was negative, by coming home to, even bigger mess than you left in the first place. You would have a negative reaction, and maybe in fight or flight, you would avoid the situation or you would start yelling. Okay? But when you come home, you can easily bring the groceries in and set them aside and move on with your life, even though you were triggered by a different state. So there can be positive triggers and negative triggers. And we know that positive and negative triggers happen to us as our choice. Because like I said, you can read one thing, hashtag Black Lives Matter, and every person watching me is going to be triggered by that statement, especially right now since it's in the news, in a different way. And you can choose to be triggered by a statement you read on the internet or something somebody says in whatever way that you want. Okay? So hopefully this is making sense to people about it. Hi, Rob. Nice to see you today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I know it's a little bit of an unusual topic I'm talking about today, but this is really important. Now, let's get into talking about how to use these triggers, like this one I just talked about, when, you find yourself in a situation where people are talking about you, or even you are in your own head being triggered by observing your child when they do something that you don't expect, or they're not doing something that you do expect. Both of those things trigger parents. Expecting your child to perform and they don't will trigger a reaction of disappointment. Not expecting your child to do something and then they do it anyway, like the behavior at the restaurant, also can trigger you. So what you need to decide in how to use these triggering moments is actually how to respond or react. And the trick is, number one, to be conscious of the fact that you are triggered. Because when we're not conscious and just things come in at us from the outside world, which they're gonna anyway, and we're not thinking about what our reaction is, if we're triggered at all, if we're not responding, then we're reacting unconsciously. And that means that whatever you try is not coming from a solution-based, problem-solving perspective. It's coming from fight or flight, because you just want to get out or change it back. So if you can, in the moment, observe something and notice that it triggers you, like you see your child flapping their hands or walking on their toes, or, you have asked a question and prompted them and they didn't respond to the prompting, and you're triggered by that and you're feeling disappointed, right? Instead of unconsciously feeling bad about yourself, or maybe thinking language facilitation doesn't work, or you did it wrong, or you blame your child, it's just he's autistic and he's never going to talk and I don't have it in me and all that stuff I read on the page, right? You start going into these negative self-sabotage kinds of mindsets. The new state of this negative thing is flight. I don't want to work anymore. I'm not going to try anymore. I'm a failure at it. Or instead of just in the moment reacting to that disappointment, understand where it's coming from. And then you turn it around to a positive situation, because you're like, ooh, I know why this is happening now, because he is annoyed by me, or I'm pressuring too hard, or he's too tired, or he's had enough, or he just wants one more thing, or he needs that stim behavior to feel better, and I judged it or took it away or tried to change his comfort zone. I triggered him in some way, or he was unconsciously triggered in some way and I'm just reacting to that trigger. And then when you realize it in a split second, oh, look at what's going on here. The triggers are going off all over the place. My kid's being triggered. That kid's triggering him. I'm triggering me. Then you have a choice. Because when you realize you can choose to behave, you're not behaving unconscious anymore. And if you need to yell at your child to tell them to stop putting that, dirt in their mouth or whatever they're trying to do, you're going to do it consciously so that you show your child that it's not a good idea to put dirt in your mouth and why it's a bad idea. You're not going to react and scream at your child to tell them to put it down and scare them into fight or flight where no learning can happen. When you realize what's going on to trigger everybody, you see the little bombs going off kind of energetically, and you can be almost in like time warp, slow motion, and go, aha, this is what's going on right now, and I have a choice. I can unconsciously yell and scream at my child, but I know that's not going to help because now I'm being conscious. Or I can step in and try to diffuse the bomb that was triggered, right? The fire that went off, the reaction that's going on right now. You can go in and put out the fire and calm it down. So when someone says something nasty about you, and you realize that they were triggered because who knows what happened in their life that caused them to feel so hurtful or embarrassed or, whatever they're projecting onto you that they don't like about your situation. And they want you to change because you have triggered them to be out of their comfort zone. They were having a nice time and your kid started yelling. And they felt infringed upon and they feel like that's your problem that you need to change. And it's really theirs because they're the one that has a choice about how they respond to things. Because another family might hear you and have some empathy for you and realize that your kiddo's trying to communicate and they're having a tough time right now. Okay? You don't have any control over what those other people are doing, but you do have a control about how you feel, how you respond when you are triggered. Maybe you need to be in fight or flight in that moment. And then consciously you fight harder or you run faster, okay? Because it is a dangerous situation which causes fight or flight. But when you're conscious, like I said, you run faster or you fight harder. And when you are conscious to not even engage in the fight and you realize it's not worth it because your energy is better spent in positive, constructive solutions instead of reactive behavior, which might in the moment make you feel good, but later on make you feel bad. That's how you know it's unconscious. How much time do you spend in your day after yelling at your child, feeling bad about it? Or not helping your child through something and making them struggle because you thought it was a good idea and then you felt bad that you didn't help them later, right? Don't feel bad about your actions. Decide to change them. And in the moment, this is a tricky thing to overcome because remember, these emotional things that you choose to do in response or reaction to the triggers that happen to you are programmed in your brain by you and what you've been exposed to. They might have been programmed by your parents, or they might have been programmed by your speech therapist or your ABA person or what you read on the internet or me. Okay? But you are responsible for what happens when those triggers happen because you're not going to stop people from posting Black Lives Matter and you're not going to stop other people from responding with All Lives Matter and you're not going to respond to other people for writing all of their details about how they agree with one or the other. That everyone will do what they are going to do. Your choice is how you want to react. Okay, and you can be a reactionary where you run away or fight against it, or you can be involved, however you can, in making the change that solves the problem that caused the trigger in the first place. If you can, right? In your house, in your life, you can. You might not feel empowered to change Black Lives Matter, or you might feel empowered to change Black Lives Matter. That's on you. That's up to you. But what I'm saying is that if it triggers you, you have the opportunity to use that trigger to decide for yourself how you move forward with Black Lives Matter or your child not talking as fast as you think they should be talking or answering the questions or following the directions or sitting in front of the whatever you are expecting that you're disappointed about. You have to understand the reaction to that disappointment because your child's not sad about not using talking unless they're desperate to use talking, and then they're only going to be sad if you're not teaching them. And that does happen in my program. There's a mom right now I have who has an 11-year-old who is a twin, and she started language facilitation, and she fell off of her language facilitation and went back to prompting, and then went back to language facilitation, and her son was so happy, and she saw in her son the difference. When she went back to prompting, he didn't like her anymore. He had more reaction to her intervention, the time they spent together. And the reaction was he went away from it. And then when she saw that and realized he was being triggered by her behavior, she changed and re-looked at her situation and went back to using nice language models and not forcing and prompting or triggering her child, because you know what triggers your child. If you keep pushing their buttons, they're going to keep reacting because kids don't have the ability to consciously choose. If they're triggered, they're going to react. As you evolve with your emotional intelligence and emotional understanding as adults, you are able to control these things, unless you're not. The only way you are is if you're living in conscious reality of the situation and not just reacting to things as they come. Because surprises will happen and you will be triggered. But you have a choice of whether you react in a negative way, fight or flight, or you respond in a positive way with action that is targeted to get you moving forward. And when you understand what your child is communicating by these reactions to the triggers, and you understand what the triggers are, then you learn to use the positive triggers that will trigger the positive reactions. Like, we want mom to be happy, so we're going to clean up the house every time she goes to the store. New habits develop out of positive reactions. Bad habits persist out of negative reactions because there's no teaching. It's just reaction. So if you want to use what is triggering you, whatever is triggering you, because there are things triggering you, physical things, emotional things. When they trigger you, your choice in how to react is how you move forward, okay? Positive reaction, response is problem solving, and that's where it goes. All right, so Rav says, so I've got a question here. Rav says, my daughter intimidated to play with kids, but because of sensory behavior, she touches one girl's ponytail and shirt sequences. The other girl ran away, and I told my kid not to touch. Right. So, so he initiated. Yeah, so that's it. When kids are nonverbal, it doesn't stop them from wanting to communicate, from wanting to engage with other kids. So what happened in your child's case was your child was using the natural thing, and he wanted to touch that child's ponytail and shirt and say, wow, I like that. That's a cute ponytail, because your child was thinking those things, wanted to experience and share that with the child, but without vocalization, without speech. They're stuck. They only have their body, and they're triggered by, wow, that's a beautiful ponytail. I just want to touch it. And like I said, you can't stop that trigger. Your child's interested in something. They're going to naturally be gravitated towards it. So in the moment you said to your child, don't touch, but your reaction was this girl didn't like you touching, and you just told your child to stop because you're helping the girl. She had a reaction. She didn't understand that your child was just wanting to engage and be social with her. And in the moment, instead of just saying fight or flight, I'm going to take my kid and take him away from this situation, you could use that moment to say, aha, he really likes your ponytail. He does not mean to hurt you. I'm sorry he made you afraid. I'm sure he didn't mean to scare you. I'm sure he doesn't mean to do it. He just really likes things, and he explores with his hand. So it's okay. And then you talk to your child right there in the moment. We can just look at her ponytail and you can tell the girl, flap your ponytail around for a minute so we can watch it. And you can tell your child, watch that girl flap her ponytail. Oh, it's a cool ponytail. I can see why he likes it. Same with the shirt. Ooh, your shirt's beautiful. My child was really interested in your shirt and he just explores with his hands. So I know it feels bad, but we have to remind him when we look at things, we look with our eyes and look how pretty that pink shirt is. That's so pretty. I'm sorry we infringed on your space. We're still working on this skill, right? So you explain to the girl because she was triggered by the situation. Maybe next time another child or your child even comes up to try to touch her, she won't react with a negative, oh no, here he comes again, that kid who's touching me. She will understand more about the situation. And if she doesn't want your child to touch you, then she can say, use your eyes and move away because you showed her what kind of cues you need. Or she can run away and decide on herself. She reacts her own way. And if your child is sad because that child runs away because they don't want, your child is triggered. Oh no, I just was being nice and this child was, trying to thought, that you can't control what anyone else thinks, right? But you can help your child by explaining that because you can see after the reaction, oh, that girl was afraid of you, just like you wrote here, Rav. That child was afraid of you and they don't like it when you touch it. It makes them feel sad. So that's why we have to keep our hands or we have to wave at our friends when we see them. And we give high fives and thumbs ups or foot touches or, whatever you're using as your new social hello. You know what I mean? For a nonverbal child, they've got to have something to use. If you don't want them to go up and touch and maul every kid or push kids around when they want them to come play, you have to show your child how to initiate, just like you're saying, communication, not with using their speech, with demonstration about that. And if you can't trust that your child knows enough language to not use their hands when they first interact with other kids, then you're going to have to monitor that situation and remind that other child because that other child's going to be triggered by your kid. And if you want to help the whole situation, you got to be aware of it. He's going to go touch somebody. Yep, she got angry. He triggered her. Let's go diffuse it because that's what you do to stop triggers. You diffuse, right? Everybody's triggered. Diffuse, right? The trigger is the light of the match. The defuse is to put it out. So that, okay, nothing's going to change right now. In this state, we get back to our comfort zone. It might be a new comfort zone, that we're happy in the new comfort zone. After the shock, there is the recovery. And when you use it as a positive experience to learn from, most of your kids are way smarter than the words that they use. And they can understand when you go through and explain these things because they don't understand why they're triggered. They feel a certain way and they're reacting. Usually it's fight or flight. But always with families, after they start to work with their kids' triggers and their own, then you have less of these reactionary behaviors because your child learns to say things like, stop, go away, I'm annoyed with you, instead of whacking you, right? They learn to look at their triggers and learn a better conscious response. It feels better to use my words instead of whack you. Just like when you feel bad after yelling at your kids, they feel bad after hitting you or having tantrums or wrecking stuff. Especially if you got mad and yelled at them for doing that. They're gonna feel bad and remorseful, right? You might not think they do because they do that behavior again. And they don't do that behavior again out of malicious or because they're sad. It's their communication. And you're being triggered emotionally by their regular, everyday communication that they invented. And it's you that's being triggered. They're not initiating that trigger, just like the little girl. But they are, because in some case, your expectations not been met, just like the girl. When your kid went up to go touch her, her expectation was, I don't expect kids to come up and actually physically touch me. Other kids don't do that. She didn't expect it from your child. Her expectations were not met. She was triggered. So Rod says, I couldn't know how to react and make my kid understand. Lots of sensory behaviors. She couldn't play properly and converse with them, but she is so happy to see them, right? You need to work through that with your child and explain to her. Your kids understand a lot more than you think they do. Thank you. I told her to say, I like your ponytail. And she said, but she needs a lot of practice in her communication to overcome her sensory behavior. Yep, that's true. Because the sensory behavior and the nonverbal behavior are your child's first language. Remember, speech for any late talker is their second language. The first language is the nonverbal stuff and the limited words and the noises and dragging you around and all that. That's what they're using right now every day, all day, is their current language. This new speech that you're trying to facilitate is their second language. And whenever you have an emotional moment or a confusing moment, or you're too tired, because it takes more effort to shift into the second language that you're not as good at, okay? So think about if you are a dual language speaker yourself, when you are stressed or whatever and somebody else is trying to have a conversation in that second language, your brain always shifts back to your home language. And it takes more effort to stay in the new language, understanding and having conversation, especially if you're new at it, right? And especially if there are triggers going on, right? Anytime there's a trigger, your concentration goes down because you hit reactionary mode. It changes your state. When you're focused and in the zone, when I talk about the zone, that is resonant, focused, conscious, engaged. Everybody understands what everybody means right now. Everybody's on the same page. All of that. That happens in the zone. Triggers get you out of the zone. So, hey, Susan, thanks for popping in and saying hi. Hopefully this concept of understanding triggers and how to use these triggering moments to help you. When you push through them and ignore them and work around them and just sort of, realize you're triggered and then try to go back later to solve those problems, it never works. Working with triggers has to happen in the moment, and it comes from conscious awareness in the first place that you're being triggered. And that's where it starts. And once you learn that you realize that you're being triggered by the situation, you will automatically take the conscious action. And like I said, if it's fight or flight, it'll be the biggest fight or flight you ever did in your life. And if it is negotiation and problem solving, it will be the best problem solving that you have available to you in the moment. And will it all work perfectly every time? Maybe not, but you'll learn from it. And then later, the likelihood of being triggered again will go down because you'll be teaching these situations new habits, new lifestyle changes, new ways to react when these things that trigger us that are going to come anyway. For kids who have sensory problems, they're triggered all day, every day, right? They're always trying to get themselves back in resonant zone comfort level. If they have a lot of sensory issues, they get triggered immediately, boom, right out of that comfort zone. You can work with your child when you see them triggered and understand what it was that triggered them and help them work with that exterior stimulus, right? If they don't like loud parties, if they don't like people touching them, whatever. You have to work with those things to help your child understand that they're going to happen in the world, and the next time it happens, mommy or daddy's going to be right here and help you. And then when they learn that, then they will be more confident about trying. But if they feel like they've got to solve their own problems, especially if you are triggering them, by pressuring them, making them say things, asking them questions all day. If you're asking your child questions all day, you're triggering them all day, every day. So that's what you have to understand. If you're triggering your child and then you're seeing behavior you don't like, that's how you use this information. You realize, why are we not seeing progress? If you're stuck and you're not seeing progress and you're not moving forward, it's because there are triggers going on, and it keeps you all on the back foot, putting out fires, defusing. You're spending all this time defusing instead of taking conscious action moving forward. And that's how you do it. All right, not seeing any more questions today, and I already saw the video popping off. Plus, who knows what's going on with the construction outside. So I'm going to get off of here for now. Thanks for joining me, everybody, and I will see you all on my next video. Bye for now.